So we are live on YouTube also. I think a few more other people will be joining in. I'll start the recording in like another minute. Yeah. So we are live on YouTube also. I think a few more other people will be joining in. I'll start the recording in like another minute. So we are live on YouTube also. More other people will be joining. Sorry, no, I opened the my own YouTube channel just to check. So it's repeating what I'm saying.
Can you put it on mute or something?
No, I closed it. I don't need to see my own video.
It's playing again and again.
Still, are you able to hear it? Yeah.
होने वाला है.
Okay, so we have a few more people. Hello, Mitangi. Hi, Anurit. And yeah. Rosie, you have the co-host duties. Yeah. Oh, wait. Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay. So everyone, I guess we will keep having people joining in, and that's not a problem because this is anyway today's session is supposed to be in casual, interactive one. So I would definitely request people to have the video on if you can. I'm going to start recording this, and over time we will keep having people to join in. Yes, so we are recording. Okay, so great. You seem to have good, gathering a number. Hi Anaga, hi Anuja.
Hi.
I I hope you guys are having a good weekend. I mean, relaxing Saturday and all.
Mine hasn't started yet.
Oh, that's true.
But it's good to see you after so long. How you been?
That's true, Anuja. It's good. The good you caught up this thing. You were asking and all. We got back in touch and all. Can't wait to meet you whenever I'm back in Bangalore.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great. So while we wait for a few more people, I think people are going to come in. I did realize there was a small issue with the registration, which was a little difficult. So we may have like a lag in the way people will join in. But yeah, this is the second, second edition or second session of Mathematical Meetup. I think a lot of you guys have been regulars, so you know what Mathematical Meetup has been about. It's just a casual conversation we have around the topic of mythology. The main reason this was started off when I started doing mathematical was that it's very common to assume that we have a certain presumption about mythology and myths. We tend to feel a sense of confidence with certain types of stories, and sometimes we don't feel confidence. And in general, I kind of have always I have interacted with a lot of people where they tend to feel that, oh, I don't know enough myths. So they would have a sort of a passive approach of wanting to listen to someone who's either an academician or seem to be a connoisseur of mythology. But to be honest, if you look back at history and if you look at what has been happening, myths never belong to one person. They were never supposed to be this one thing. I mean, the whole purpose of myths have always been that they belong to a community of people, and people have always revised, added their own things, debated, discussed, and all. And I wanted to bring that sense of tradition back. in mythology, because mythology in the end is a conversation. And which is where this mathematical meetup started, where I wanted to introduce the idea of having this informal discussion around a theme, because it's always easier to discuss. There are no right answers and wrong answers. I mean, just for people, in case you're, if you're worried about having to have strong opinions, you don't have to have any opinions. You are allowed to have strong opinions. You're allowed to have moderate opinions, and you're allowed to change your opinions also. Because in the end, I mean, the fun of myths is that, how they transform you. So in the first mathematical meetup, we had talked about what is myth. And that's the way we had started off. And there was a very interesting discussion. Many of you were part of it that time. And then I think what came out of that was very different point of views, interesting insights and all that did inform me into my flagship series that I do called Mathematical. Mathematical started off as this idea where I wanted to explore myths, not just from Indian culture, but also from different cultures around the world, and compare and contrast them, churn them out around a theme to bring out new, fresh insights. Too often, I felt, when we are looking at myths in silos, we tend to we don't tend to see them in a different light. And I think by seeing myths against each other's, and also sometimes in its own way, brings a new way of looking at myths itself. So that is what Mathematical started, and Mathematical Meetup was sort of an offshoot of that, which is the reason I wanted to bring this up again. And for a few of you guys, if if you're not, if you don't know who I am, I'm not exactly some professionally qualified for mythology. I am, I've not done some sort of formal studies in mythology. It's just something of my interest. I think for those of you guys who know me, myths have always been a big part of my life. I've always been interested listening to stories, making up stories. And also, I think in the most important thing with myths have always been is that I've always liked to find different ways how people look at myths. And that has always informed me. By profession, I'm a UX designer. And I always look at how UX designing or user experience designing is basically the idea of how do you optimize an experience for a user. So a lot of things from my vocation do inform me in the way I want to approach. And I do have plans to do more of these things. I think lockdown definitely gave the push that many of us needed to start producing content. So that's about Mathematical and me. I wanted to just set that context just so that it helps everyone understand why they're here. I'm sure that you found the I mean, at least the promos and all interesting enough to be here and all. I do want to mention one thing before we jump right into the conversation. One of the reasons I also took up I know this session's theme, are myths problematic, is automatically a slightly controversial one, especially given the current climate and all. So I know that many of you may have certain reservations, and it's all fine if you do. But do understand this is a safe space. I would urge everyone out here to keep in mind that people may have different opinions, and at the same time, it's okay if you if you change your perspective, or if you're able to bring a new perspective to someone else. Okay. We may touch upon some topics which may be very topical, and sometimes someone may bring up something that may be slightly sensitive. So I would just urge everyone to maintain the decorum in the way you express it. Just have the consideration of how it may come across, but also for people who are listening to it, I hope you guys don't take it too personally and all. I do know that myths have an association with identity, and we try to protect them. But I think that is also a part of the conversation I want to have, that does this all make myths problematic? Once again, I would just urge everyone to have their videos on if you can, so that it's just easier for everyone to see who you're talking to. Otherwise, we'll just have this name that we are talking to every thing. And it's okay, I mean, just keep it open. It's going to be a casual conversation. I myself will take a sort of a backseat. I will just be moderating. I would urge that everyone who has a perspective and all, try to make a point in a minute. If you are going, if your point is interesting and there is something, I will allow you to have 1 more minute. so that we have other people and everyone, talking and chiming in. So yeah, I think we can start off with the session. The first things first, I want to start off before we jump into talking about the session. The session itself is I would want to welcome all of you, and I would want to hear from all of you. Maybe you guys can talk about who you are, what is it that what is it you like doing, and maybe your favorite myth and your association with myth. Okay, so we can start with Mr. Manoj here. Maybe you can go and let us know.
Yeah, frankly speaking, Kanti, am I audible?
Yeah, you are audible, sir. Yeah.
Frankly speaking, Kanti, I don't believe in all these myths, and I try to see mostly myths with a scientific point of view. So, as such, mine is not any favorite myth, but really, sometimes I feel that how people are so much convinced of the myth. I don't say it do not works, because if they are convinced, because it's basically the unsound mind that plays a big picture, not the sound mind. And if something is based in my unsound mind, it is bound to happen with me. Maybe it a coincidence for the other person, but the person who is believing it as a myth will always take it as it was supposed to. It is not a coincidence. So this is my part. Let the other respondents come, then we can discuss later. Thank you.
So out here we all have participants. I don't think there's a team. This thing we can do that in the end. We can have form certain type of teams regarding certain views. But yeah, Mr. Mano, that's really fascinating to hear. Okay, we'll go ahead. I think the next person, Rohina, maybe you can talk about yourself and your interests in myths.
Yeah. I'm kind of a novice. I'm not really. I don't really study myths as just like our host here, but it is interesting. I think it's an interesting space to look at culture and people, and so that's where I think I would come in. I am a designer by profession, so again, I think some of those aspects that Anupriya talked about of having empathy and understanding how humans work, I think that's my perspective as well. So that's looking forward.
Do you have any favorite myths or anything that stands out to you?
Favorite myths? I don't know. I think the MCU has done a great job in like making me understand Norse myths for some reason. I don't think I have a favorite, but yeah, but definitely awareness has gone up of like the different kinds of myths. Thanks to you.
Okay, that's good to know. Influencing someone at least. Great. We can go to Anaga. Do you want to go ahead?
Sure. So hi, I see a lot of familiar people, so I'm not going to bore you guys with an introduction again because we've been keeping in touch for a while. But basically, I'm Anagha. I'm a product design student, and I'm also a dancer and singer, classical dancer and singer by like as a hobby. And my involvement with myths came from there, and now I try to sort of, sorry.
No.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So so that's sort of how I got into myths, and obviously that was Indian mythology to begin with, and then I started broadening my perspective and studying more about it. So that's sort of where I come from. My favorite myth like changes from time to time, but given our current scenario, I think Ahilya's story is what really stands out to me. So that's probably going to be my favorite.
Yeah, I think it's very fascinating when you revisit a myth and it becomes a new favorite at times. I think, but yeah, Naga, that was really fascinating, and I love having conversations with you around these topics a lot. So great to have you here. Great, we'll just move ahead to Anuja.
Hi guys, am I audible?
Yeah, Anuja, you're audible and we can see you.
Hi. Okay, so I am actually working with Times of India currently as a brand strategist. Anupriya and I were classmates in Srishti, and we were both working towards myth at that point. And I don't really have like particularly a favorite myth or something, But yeah, practically all my knowledge about mythologies comes from those Amar Chitra Kathas. Do you remember that? Yeah. Apart from that, I haven't really read anything. And yeah, so that's pretty much it.
Yeah. So by the way, guys, so Anuja and we were in Srishti, and to be honest, something harder to define than what is a myth is what we did in Srishti itself, called Advanced Diploma course, the thing program. I think the diverse definition of myths doesn't compare to the ambiguity that of the course definition. If you ask any faculty and even us, we all had different definitions of what we did. But nonetheless, it was a fascinating time, and definitely was something that is memorable. And I'm glad Anuja is here today. Okay, we'll go ahead. So then we have, I think we have my dad, Anurag Kanti. Dad, maybe you can give your introduction and any favorite myth or anything that stands out.
Well, okay. Just let me put on my camera. Yeah, sorry, I don't have a very great lighting right now. So basically, when you talk of myths, my understanding is instead of thinking it and justifying it in scientific terms, how this happened and all, it's more about messaging. And myths have been a tool to give message to the people, which may be otherwise difficult or sometimes not so easily understood. And this messaging best goes with telling some kind of stories and other things. And obviously, it is time dependent from what time it came from. And something which is acceptable at one time becomes unacceptable another time, and that is why then we have this kind of discussion whether they are problematic or not, because things which were right or considered to be right now perhaps may not be considered right. So I would be interested to hear more on what kind of views people have on that, and let's see.
Oh, that's interesting. Pretty balanced view, and I do definitely understand where you're coming from, Dad. Going ahead, Anurit. So by the way, Anurit's my brother, for a couple of people who don't know. Anurit, maybe you can go ahead.
Yeah, for me, myths, as Dad said, it's more about learnings and messaging, and I kind of have a academic literature kind of view of myths, where you can look at particular stories in myths and derive morals from it, derive human psychology elements from it, relate it to current contemporary times. Something which stories which can be reimagined to current situations is something which really interests me. So obviously, and when it comes to favorite myths, I have obviously from Mahabharata, I have particular stories which fascinate me a lot. For example, the story of I'm not sure of the names at all, but some all the Pandavas die, and then only Yudhishthir is said he can bring one brother back, and he chooses Nakul instead of his one of his own brothers. Instead of Arjun or Bhim. So there are particular stories in the dog following Yudhishthir thing which really interests me as well because of my love for animals and Yudhishthir kind of. So there are particular stories which interest me, but yeah, I have a very academic and I treat myth as literature which you should analyze for contemporary learnings and psychology elements and messaging and morality views and philosophical views. So that's my view of myths.
That's interesting. I think many people can, look at that sentiment of myths being more of a knowledge source than that. We'll go ahead. We'll go to Mathangi. Maybe you can introduce yourself.
Hi guys. So interesting to see what everyone had to say. And for me, actually, I right from school days, I kind of enjoyed history a lot, history and English. So that kind of brought me to this entire thing of myths and mythology and stuff like that. I'm a big fan of the Mahabharata, and I kind of I feel like I don't really look too much about the scientific point, whether we can justify it, was it true, was it not true, but I just think it's so interesting, especially when you visit a place or even a sightseeing spot or anything like that. I like to speak to the people around and ask them, are there any myths or folk tales or folklores associated with that place? Because I somehow feel it gives you a much more authentic perspective than something you could read on, Wikipedia or something like that. So I kind of look forward to asking people whether there were any extra stories, small time stories, what do you all believe in, something associated with that spot and stuff like that. Somehow it's very interesting for me. So I don't really look at the scientific angle, whether we can justify it, was it true and all, but it somehow gives me a very, I don't know, that fantasy or whatever it is, it seems very wonderful for me. And I can't say a particular favorite myth, but my favorite character actually for a large part is Karna. I kind of like a lot of the stories associated with him.
That's interesting. Yeah, I think Karna is a very complex character. A lot of us have a certain opinion about him. Great,
Correct.
you move
So
ahead.
I feel maybe like, he was more contemporary now than he was possibly born at the wrong time.
That's an interesting way of looking at it. Great, we can move ahead. So, Dr. Rajiv Thapar, maybe you can just give your introduction and any interesting myths you like or why you like myths.
Am I audible?
Yeah, Uncle, you're audible.
Okay. Hello.
Hello.
Good evening to all of you. Actually, I am a pediatrician, so I don't have much information regarding myths, but definitely after seeing the movie Stree, yeah, there's another myth. I don't know whether we call it as a myth or, and there is a story related to that movie, which so it may be. So I'm just looking forward to what all this is about. Definitely, we believe in historical facts and we give due reverence to all those. You may call it as a myth, but they are Ramayana, Mahabharata. They are our historical pursuits. We value them and we respect them. You can put them into any of your narrations. We accept that also. And I welcome to Manoj Agarwalji from. Nice to see you after a long time.
Yeah, sir. Nice. Same, yes, my pleasure. It's pleasure all mine.
So I'm looking forward to learning something new because it is always good to know more about a thing from youngsters and who think in their perspectives, who think maybe in their perspective, whatever the things are there. So just looking forward to the thing. I'm a basically pediatrician working in a private setup now. Thank you.
That's good to hear. Definitely, I think one thing I've always found, it's just an opinion. The thing is, I've always found myths to be a transgenerational conversation, or something that is happening, and it's obviously easy to see it flowing from older generation to newer generation. But I think what's changing is also there's like every time we we connect or we create a new myth or the way we think about it, the older generation learns something new from like how the new people are seeing it. So that's definitely interesting. We'll go ahead. We have Tamasha. I hope I'm pronouncing the name right. Is it Tamasha or Tamsha? Yeah. Please give your introduction and let us know, why you like myths, or do you like myths actually? Yeah.
Hi. I don't know why my camera is not on, but
no.
I guess that's okay. I guess that's okay. Yeah. I teach and I use a lot of myths to make that connection between me and the students. The things I keep learning. I love the new reworkings of the myths which we are reading about now. My name itself is very mythical. It's on the banks. It's actually a river, and on the banks of this, the Ramayana was written. So I love stories, and I teach literature. So that's the connect for me. I have many favorite stories, and regarding characters, so difficult to just zero in down on somebody. But I love this talk which is happening here. I am a great listener.
That's great to know. How do you pronounce your name then?
It's Tamasa, where
Yeah. No, that's good to know. I think that's fascinating that, about this thing. Maybe you can tell us more about that part where, the Ramayana was written, the mythical connection and all. It's always good to know. I think that's a very interesting thing we have, especially a lot in India, where many of our names and identity are derived from myths. And I think by in a way, it's a thing that puts us in a position that a child growing up will have some connection with myths just because of the name, the thing. So sometimes I also feel that people who may not have really enjoyed a particular myth and all will just find a connection just because of the way they've been grown up and all. We've all had that and all, so that's a very interesting thing. We have a couple of more people. We'll go ahead. So we have Renu Thapar. Auntie, I think you can go ahead and give us your introduction and a favorite myth. Sorry, are you going to hear us? Yeah, go ahead.
Hi. Yeah. Hi.
Hello.
Good evening. First of all, I'm very happy. So seeing younger people taking so much interest in myths, knowing about the myths. So, and not only they are reading it, I mean, they are giving their opinions. They are, I mean, doing lots of things about that. For me, myths they give me guidance in my life situations where I'm stuck. So I take guidance from many myths.
Wow.
It's not important that they are. I mean, it's not. I don't fully think they are facts or they are reality. That's not the thing. But they help me in life.
Yeah, that's really nice.
So that's the myth for me.
Definitely, and I like what you said about the idea of inspiration and problem solving. I think sometimes looking at too academically and too much from a literature point of view, we tend to miss that element or not acknowledge that element. So it's really interesting that you brought that part, and maybe you can during the conversation we can talk a lot more about that. So we'll go ahead and we have so we also have Chaitanya. Chaitanya, nice to see you, buddy. So we are just doing an introduction. I think you just joined in. So we're just going around the thing. Maybe you can introduce yourself and talk about your, why you're interested in myth or a favorite myth.
Hi. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
My name is Chaitanya Mukund, and I'm a freelance writer, blogger, and specially abled model. And मेरे हिसाब से जो मिथ्स होते हैं, हमारी पूरी लाइफ ही मिथ से भरी हुई है. मतलब हम इंडियंस की लाइफ मिथिकल मैं कहूँगा, एंड इसी के चलते मैं अगले हफ्ते यानी कि दशहरे वाले दिन अपना एक YouTube चैनल शुरू करने वाला हूँ, द मिथिकल माइंड, जिसमें मैं एक ऐसी स्टोरीज लेके आऊंगा जो शायद ही आप लोगों ने सुनी होगी, जो कि वर्ल्ड ओवर माइथोलॉजी से तो होंगी, लेकिन इंडियन माइथोलॉजी उनके डिफरेंट वर्जन से होंगी. सो आई होप यू विल enjoy it all, and I will need your blessings and support.
Definitely, Chaitanya. That's really exciting to hear. Guys, definitely check this out. I'm looking forward for that. I think for me, the source of finding myths, especially in an internet era, is the thing, and looking forward for that. But and thanks for being here. Okay, so we also have Sumit. Sumit, maybe you can introduce yourself to the team and also talk about your connection with myths, your interest in myths.
Hi, am I audible?
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually got to know of this session through my friend Anana, and I enjoyed her session on the Natya Shastra. I was like, should learn more. My personal connection to myths, I mean, I have a lot of myths that through the grandparents and all, but I don't think I have a particular favorite, but some of my favorites are always the ones about the Pandavas, where they how they get up to and they deal with the trouble that comes with living outside, and they get up to all sorts of stuff that that I never actually heard of until I actually read a translation of the Mahabharata, especially like the one where maybe people know it differently, but where Arjun has to go teach dance to the Apsaras, which I found very, very interesting.
Yeah, that's true.
So yeah, that's what my relationship to mythology is, myths particularly.
That's pretty interesting. So I like the bit you picked out. I think that that opens up so much possibilities from interpretation, from the stories itself, and even where that story is placed in the larger context is a very fascinating. I think a deal by itself. So yeah, I think we have we have a very diverse and a very interesting set of people coming with the thing. I mean, how we look at myths and all. So the first thing I want to start off, and I just want to leave this open and all, is the term myth itself, right? I mean, are you guys happy with it? Do you like the term myths, or do you feel the myths doesn't do justification to all the stories you've heard that it just gets associated with it, whether it's the Itihasic stories in Ramayana and Mahabharata, whether it's the Greek stories, Norse stories and all. What is your feeling towards the word myths or mythology? Anyone can go. Okay, we can. It's not going to be a formal session.
Yeah, Manoj here.
Yeah, good.
Kanti, when we say myth, we do feel that it never existed, or it is just a story or the verses which are being carried by our great grandfathers, and we come to know that's it. But if we have some scientific evidence, or if not scientific evidence, even we are sure of these things that these happened really. Because I have read history also somewhat. I'm not that saying that I'm that much well versed in these kind of myths. But when you see them, scientifically or with the logic, then you don't find them to be that appropriate. If you say change the word from myth to some more concrete word, that might generate or give the impression to the youngsters who are coming up, or means my son and all means teenies, that they may rely. Because as I was a teenie, say down the line, I was told they are myth. So when you say a myth, you say okay, myth, then no reliability is there as such. No, as I mentioned, logic is there. They do say it happened. We say maybe there are stories or the epics, or big verses which are being sung by our great grandfathers and passed on to further to other generations. So if we really can put any good word for myth, then I think it should work. But what the word will be, again, a debatable issue.
That's
my part.
So just
I agree with. Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Anuja.
Okay, no. So I quite agree with what Mr. Manoj said. I think myth is it's a good term to like associate with these stories, because otherwise there's a danger of them being taken too seriously. Because like a couple of years back, I came across this article on The Wire. I can't really say much about the credibility of this article, but what they were trying to do with the myths is like they were trying to put them in the history textbooks, right? Which can be a little problematic considering the scenario today, right? So it's good to like let them remain as stories. They can give us inspiration, they can be looked at as entertainment, and we can like try to find like some sort of scientific or I don't really know what to say about this, but like, yeah, I mean, like, sorry, just a second.
No worries. Yeah.
No, so I mean, like we can try to find some scientific associations with it, and like they can be like sources of a lot of phenomena. Like let's say time traveling was first mentioned in Mahabharata, right? Where Raivata transfers to heaven and then comes back here, and then I mean, so like a lot of things were mentioned for the first time in the Mahabharata, but we have taken inspiration from them, and then we have kind of expanded these concepts a lot. But we can't really like put them in the history textbooks, for example. So I think it's good to let them remain as myths.
That's interesting. So do you think the problem, I'm just opening up to the group, as Mr. Manoj and Anuja mentioned this, the problem is with the term myth itself, like the fact that when we are trying to put myth in a different domain like history, or is it the fact that I mean, is it the problem with the fact that, we are trying to take what is considered myth and putting it in a different context? Is it the problem of the term or what we are doing with it?
I'd like to go if it's okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I think there is, I'm unsure how to exactly put it, but then there is so much importance given nowadays to just that things have to be practical and scientific that we don't enjoy stuff just for the sake of enjoying them. So when we bring in this word myth, it kind of puts one pressure on you that you need not believe, that if you believe, then it's kind of like, oh God, you believe in myths and stuff like that. But I have a feeling that once we put this name of being scientific and practical, it kind of closes us more to the possibility of maybe something existed, maybe not, maybe it did. But why should we find a way that, to prove that it actually did or actually did not, without just seeing, the fact that, okay, this idea was out there. Maybe there were people who were so, extremely physically powerful, or they could do something, or maybe we are arriving to that level of, being scientifically smart or advanced. Maybe now, maybe they already had it earlier, but why do we have to keep comparing and putting it into another box? Let it just exist, So I feel we could possibly, just that word myth gives you that thing of you should not believe. It kind of, it's just a myth kind of a thing. Like we could just possibly say it's a belief. People believe here that something happened. People believe that something happened somewhere else. So let them believe. You don't believe, it's okay. But yeah, but maybe the word myth kind of brings a little bit of pressure to it, I feel.
Okay, that's interesting. Anyone else wants to add anything?
I fully support her, and she has put the things in the right perspective. So myths is a derogatory word, so to say. It's not a very respectful word. So putting the Ramayana, Mahabharata into myths, I will not. I will take it as a not respectful. That's okay. What they have to be given due respect. Whatever things they are now, so many things are coming up that they were so advanced. Intrauterine fertilization was already there. IVF, now we are having so those things were there. They have mentioned that. So why to give them a demeaning word? That's I would say I fully support the previous week speaker.
No, I think
Kanti,
that's
to put on it.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, Kanti, please, you can complete.
No, I was just saying that's very interesting. I think the myth as a derogatory term, or myth as a ambiguous or a sort of a term that I think especially contemporary people, we associate with it. The pressure we feel that certain things should not be considered myth. I think it's a very interesting thing, and it talks a lot about how we've been experiencing the term. So that's interesting. Anyone else wants to add anything?
So I in my opinion, the better word for it will be itihasa. It is our itihas. So like there are several proofs of Ramayana and Mahabharata. So I don't think कि ऐसा कुछ होना चाहिए कि हाँ मिथ है, मिथ नहीं, हाँ वो वैसी स्टोरीज हैं माइथोलॉजी की जो पुराणों में है, बट वो हमें सिर्फ एक जीने का ढंग सिखाती हैं, इसलिए बनाया गया. बट अगर हम देखें कि हाँ रामायण हुई है, महाभारत हुई है, तो डेफिनेटली हुई है मेरे हिसाब से. एंड इसको मिथ कहना इज yeah, derogatory. For me, it is derogatory. जैसे अमीश त्रिपाठी भी कहते हैं कि ये सब हमारा इतिहास है. So let us call it as itihas for me.
Mukud, I
Yeah,
will
Mukund.
favor you for this particular word, the itihas. But the
Yeah.
issue is this with itihas. I don't
Yeah.
know whether I am right or wrong, but I heard it. There was a time when Patna or Nalanda University was burnt. It took 17 days, that is 17 din, and at that time formation of that Oxford and Cambridge University took place. So what all our rich history was there was being burnt deliberately by our invaders. So we are not very sure. I agree to you, Mukund, and I like this attitude of yours. Also, you are starting a channel. I really uh, wish you in advance for your success of the channel. And I will also be one of the part for that. I am assuring you. But importantly, Itihas, when you say you have to prove it, Itihas cannot be stories like all historians which are there, like Romila Thapar, R.C. Majumdar, and other historians. They have proved to some extent that something existed. And when we say our Ramayana or Mahabharata or other, even we can prove that Muhammad Sahib existed for Mohammedans, Buddha ji existed, and the most, I will say, the ancient religion, the world is Hinduism, according to our these texts or verses, whatever you say. But we have no, we have no proof to prove our existence. We have no point. We have no, proofs to prove it that we really existed. That is big deal, no?
But there was Dwarka found, and the pool was also found, the Ram Setu.
Yeah.
So I think there is, because if you see it closely, then जो उनके ancestors की कहानी, उनके पीछे उनके पूर्वजों की कहानी, मतलब राम के पूर्वजों की कहानी, कृष्ण के पूर्वजों की कहानी. तो मुझे नहीं लगता कि इतना सब कुछ जो है, इतनी सब कुछ डिटेल्ड जो उनकी डिस्क्रिप्शंस है, उनके बारे में जो लिखा गया है, वो हवा में से ही ऐसे पैदा हो गया है. वो कहीं ना कहीं किसी ना किसी फॉर्म में हमेशा होगा, तभी किसी ना किसी ने उसको लिखा है. मुझे नहीं लगता ये हवा में से ऐसे पैदा हो गया. So
Chaitanya, I think I want to put that out to the group. I mean, that's it's a very interesting point that we brought about, the historicity of these myths. But I want to bring the question a little back, and I think I want to open it again to the group. How important is the historicity of the stories themselves? Okay, and the reason I'm asking is that as soon as you bring historicity, the conversation shifts to what was real, what wasn't real, and I think the meaning of the story. Like, think about the films we watch and all, right? Many times the films we watch, they're based on real life, they're documentaries, but they're also films that are very fantastical and all, right? So I want to ask this to the group, and I want to understand that, do myths have to be real, or do they have to have a historical trace to have the same impact that they have in our society? Does the meaning begin to diminish if they weren't tethered to some sort of a historical foundation? I would want someone else also to chime in. Maybe Tamsha, you can talk about this. Tamsha, you have any perspective on this? Okay, I think
I can go. I can maybe.
Yeah.
I do agree with you. I think what was coming up in the previous discussion about what is real, what is not real. I guess it is important in some ways to think about those things, but I do think that, like, the stories themselves, like, they are human stories, and yes, as I think Anurag was saying, that sometimes they can be problematic because today's age is a little different. We have different ideas of things, but still, those stories do manifest and persist. In our movies, in our TV shows, in what we read and what we see, and so that's. I think if you look at it from that sense, it's very potent. It's very strong and active, right? So, and I think that is what we should maybe look at, and maybe some kind of patterns emerge into like how humans think, and things like betrayal, like how you bring up these themes that come up across myths, right? Those are very, I mean, that's as contemporary as possible, right? I mean, there is in families there is drama, tension, betrayal. So that I think that is what is relevant to understand. Also, I do think, like, again, like what is real, what is not, that also I don't know, and maybe somebody else can elaborate on it, but there is a certain Western aspect of thinking in that way, of looking for proof, looking for like strong evidence,
Logic.
evidence-based thinking.
Logic.
Yes. So,
Yeah.
and I don't know if that is, and again, like this is controversial again, but is that a Western way of looking at things? Is that a Western approach to something like as simple as a story about, of a human being? So, and open to discussion. If anybody has interesting points to add, please do.
Yeah, I'd like to chime in here. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Anaga. Yeah, go ahead, Anaga. Yeah.
So the question of whether or not it's important, whether a myth did happen at all, I think can be looked at in two ways. I feel like it depends on the purpose of you studying or hearing or sort of giving a discourse on a myth. Maybe when you look at it from a religious angle, because a lot of myths have, apart from the MCU that you mentioned, a lot of myths do have a sort of religious aspect to it. So when it is being studied, spoken of in the context of people's religious beliefs, then obviously it comes from a place, like Chaitanya mentioned, it comes from a place of wanting to believe that it did happen. Whether or not it happened can be discussed for years on end, but then that is sort of what people want to walk away knowing from a story. They want to know that they can tie all the places to a physical part of the country or the world, so that it gives them, it allows them to continue believing in the stories and the values that those stories hold. So it's not just about the characters or the events, it's also about the values and the beliefs that story then propagates. There, I think historicity is important, but I think for the likes of us who don't study it from a religious point of view alone, and we simply want to study the stories to understand the complexity that goes into it, because no myth is very simple. It's not just about what is happening. It's about a lot of backstory to the characters or different value systems that come into play. Even something very nuanced. I'm really sorry about the system.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's also about the kind of economic or socio-economic status of the society during that time. All these nuances sort of come in, and when we look at it with blinders on only about whether or not it happened, we might actually miss out on some more important details. So I think it is important for there to be some historicity to myths if you are studying it in a way of wanting to believe that it happened, but it might not be as essential if you simply want to look at it as a story or draw comparisons and just like understand more about the complexities of it.
That's a very interesting thing. I think the place of historicity is within the domain of the thing, but it doesn't have to engulf the entire thing. That's an interesting point. Matangi, I think you wanted to say something, right?
Yeah, I kind of wanted to club in what both of them said. It kind of both had points of view that I agree with. So the thing is, like when we talk about a myth or a story or folklore or something, there are 2-3 aspects of it that kind of come in together. One is like, the cultural part that happened at that time. One is the actual history, and one is the story, and one is like, so all these things come together forming that story or forming that belief or whatever it is. So when you look at authenticity or, historicity per se, compared to maybe other Western countries, I don't think we have so much documented information in terms of, these stories and beliefs or the actual happenings of something that happened, but lots have gone word of mouth. So I think that, the way that comparison again is kind of a problem, because with a Western perspective saying, okay, these are authorized to be authentic, they have certain steps saying, okay, this has to be documented. You have to find something like this. But we do not fall under that category because that was not the norm with us. We have some things that have been documented, but most have been word of mouth through songs, through folk tales, through proverbs and stuff like that. And it's just there. I mean, whether someone else has to come there and verify it. And like, my point is, why do we have to give someone else that entire authority? And I think, like, if from an Indian perspective, if this is part of Indian culture, then I think, like, a lot of people should know about it. It's just part of knowing something that existed in your country. So I don't see why someone else has to come in and say, authenticate the historicity of it, because you are not part of my country. And if in my country, many people, it has gone through generations together like that, or they have been, maybe a temple or a university or the Sanchi Stupa or anything, or, it something was there. So around that only this entire story has been built up. So I just think we have to be informed. It's not about studying it as a subject, but I feel the next generation should know.
That's interesting. And I think
Can I add something?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so just to address the larger theme of our myths problematic and with respect to historicity, I think that when you actually attach historicity to myths, that's when it becomes problematic, because that gets an element of people's faith, people's beliefs, people's feelings involved, which can create unrest unless historicity in the myths reveals some progressive revelation. But most of the instances of historicity to myths have created unrest of some sort, according to my beliefs. So I think attaching historicity to myths does make the myths problematic in terms of how it affects present real life situations of people's emotions and people's feelings and beliefs and faiths.
I think that's a very fascinating point, because talking about the question of historicity itself, making it problematic or making it controversial could be true. I think even the fact that many of us find the myth as a derogatory term, question comes is that, do we find it only derogatory when they're talking about our myths, or do we find it offensive when they're talking about any myths? Like, would you get as offended if Greeks' stories, the story of Zeus and all, is called myth? Or is it only offensive when we are talking about the Sanatan Dharma or the Indian story? So is it geographically limited, that anything that happens beyond this border happened truthfully, or is it thing? And I think that itself is it's a question that I think we all need to grapple with. I definitely want to just narrow in on a more specific thing, just as a next thing. In the theme of what is our myths problematic, I think we're looking at the word myth. Is myth itself problematic? And I think you all had a very fascinating point of view, and the fact that we had such a diverse opinion itself tells us how relevant this problem is. But I want to get into a little more specific, slightly more sensitive issue. Myths becoming problematic. I want to talk about the treatment and representation of gender and women, because that is, I think, a place where a lot of conversation is happening. Now, in two perspectives, I'll just put the perspective before I, obviously we will have the things. The question itself is the treatment. Is it, is myth reflecting the, is myth perpetuating certain types of gender, roles and stereotypes? Also, is it also, is it making certain types of exploitation and all? Is myth the embodiment of that? Is it the one that has been doing it? Or can myths also be considered as, even if they are, myths do have, strong, they have a vast array of female characters with different sense of personalities and all. Many times they even talk about if certain type of, punishment, or if certain types of atrocities were done against a woman, the stories themselves show what had to be done to right that wrong. So the question to you guys, what do you guys think? Like, do you think that myths itself are the perpetrators? Do they, do they breed or do they promote sexism as we see it, or do they just reflect a society as it is, and they actually are a commentary on the societal things? So maybe we can have, Dad, do you want to go ahead? Do you have any perspective on that? Hello?
Yeah, I missed that. I was replying to something.
Oh, okay. No worries. If someone else had, someone else wants to go ahead with something. Anyone has a question?
Yeah, I just want to say, I think myths in general did reflect society at that point, which was pretty patriarchal in many aspects. I think majority of the leading myths are all based in patriarchal societies. But I also feel that sometimes, about the previous point I was making, that if there's a progressive revelation when it comes to historicity of myths, for example, that if there's a progressive revelation about a woman being at the forefront of a myth rather than a male, that would be a good instance of a historicity of a myth has led to a good social outcome. But myths in general have generally been set in patriarchal society, so they reflect a more sexist outlook, I feel.
Okay, that's interesting. Anyone else wants to add to that, or
Yeah, I'd like to add. So I kind of agree with what he said, because generally, even if you're making a story, you will be kind of making the story from the situation or the surroundings that you are in. So if the myth is not, as in the myth, maybe there is a authentication factor to it, but still I would say 70% of your background information will come from whatever is the current scenario that person was, who has observed that entire thing, stayed in. So to an extent, I think it does represent society. And also the thing is, concerning women, I think that the women who kind of were not people who towed the line at that point of time, the people who are extremely possibly the disobedient women, as they say it. So those are the people who have actually made their mark in history. I mean, if you're going to see a Sultana Razia or any, or a female warrior or any other person like that, they kind of come into the forefront just because they did not behave like the other women of that time. So I don't think there is enough representation of the actual lady who was there, because if she did not make a problem for most of the guys, I don't think she was really represented, in most of the stories. So if just someone who was very nice and very poised and took care of the house and the children and something, I don't think that came up into the forefront as much as a guy and his regular maybe a day-to-day activity, maybe he was good in poetry, something. But at that point of time also, only if this woman had to do something totally against what her role was, or maybe she was pushed into such of a kind of a scenario, only then is she recorded in this kind of a story. But still, I'm sure there would have been many women who kind of manipulated their way through history, or who kind of encouraged someone and made things better. Maybe those are not represented as much.
Yeah. So I mean, the question.
Could I just say something?
Sure, yeah, Sinkamsha, go ahead.
Yeah, could I say something?
Yeah.
Tamasa. Yeah.
Yeah.
It is also which aspect we are reading. I mean, like with so many multiple rereadings today, if you see the recreated version which Amish Tripathi or anybody is presenting today of Ramayana or Mahabharata, you'll see that yes, there is a very strong woman character. If you see what Chitra Divakaruni Banerjee has written about Draupadi, or Pratibha Rai has written about Draupadi, these are that is why they are myths, because they are recreated and represented in so many other ways. But even also, if you see the way the other Ramayana was written, where Sita was represented, the one in South India, it starts with a K, Kumban or something, Ramayana. So there also, if you see, Sita has been given a very different role. Yeah, Kumban Ramayana. I'm sorry, I couldn't pronounce that. So there also, you see, Sita has been portrayed in a much different way from the traditional, the traditional way which otherwise it has come out to us. So but again, if you see Manthara and Kaikeyi were pretty liberated and showed a different kind of agency at that point of time. I mean, we can't say that women actually have not been represented in a very different way. And one fascinating thing to just add, recently I read that why Kaikeyi behaved as she did. It was because she knew that she was trying to save the throne, because she knew that whoever gains or access to the throne will die, which is why also she did not want her son to join in and to become king, and he also did not. So these are different things, and though you can, if you read it from a patriarchal standpoint, yes, you will get many points. Because right from the way Ram treated Sita or whatever, I remember even as a school child, I used to think, how could he do that as a man? So I don't know, this is just my little take on it. Thank you.
I have a point of view here. I think we are not at this time, from this time where we are, we should not be judging what has been said in a earlier a mythological story or this thing or itihas or whatever you call it, because that was the reality of that time. We are nobody to judge that why it is like that, why it has been done like that, because that's how it was at that time. One is always free to have a retelling which conforms to more of the thought process of now and things which Amish Tripathi and others are doing. It is something like if someone who's only been in the COVID times and then sees a movie of an earlier time and says, Ki, how could these people move around without masks? So you don't know why it was and how it was, but now mask is a reality. We are doing it, and that's how it is for other things also. In myths, how the projection of various kind of things are there. That was the reality of that time, and we should leave it at that. And if there is a retelling, okay, you can make it more conforming to the current thought process.
I completely agree with you. Yeah, so I feel like myths in themselves aren't as problematic as we might make them out to be. And this is something I always talk about, even when I discuss myths, like when I'm talking about a myth, do not prescribe a 2020 outlook to something that happened like, centuries ago. So yes, myths are a reflection of the society during that time, at least the time that the author wrote it in, if not the time that the myth itself took place in. But I feel like they only turn problematic or sexist when we talk about them to sort of propagate a certain mindset. So if we say that slave trade happened in the story, but you recognize that slave trade is wrong and it should not happen, and today our laws don't stand by it, then I feel like it's okay. Like Anurag mentioned that it should happen, it should be just spoken of as it was. But if we try to say that slave trade happened and then we try to justify slave trade happening and then say we can learn from it, there is some good to it, that's when it turns problematic. And the same thing goes even for sexism. So this is I feel like it again goes back to the historicity of it. The reason I'm not personally very for the trying to prescribe a date and a specific happening of a myth to any of the myths is because I feel like when we are hasty to say that it did happen, then we also want to attach all of the events as justifications for why our society is the way it is today. So how nowadays when we talk about it being his story and why so many of the stories that we have heard of or the events that we heard of are very pandering to the patriarchy. Maybe if we sort of looked at all the different perspectives of it, of something as simple as say the suffragette movement, we would see the woman's side to it as well, and we'd have a more holistic history to look at. But because we're very hasty to sort of put it down on paper and write it in stone that this is what happened, I feel like that sort of makes us forget the facts of what actually happened in the story and remove it from what's happening today. So that's again why I feel like, so it's problematic more because of us prescribing certain propaganda to it rather than the story in itself.
I totally agree with Anaga and Mr. Anurag. Also, the thing is that there are so many myths, right? And there are so many versions of these myths. So we can't really term all of them as sexist. There are certain stories that are very empowering as well. Like, I mean, off the top of my head, of course, there are stories like Madhavi, and I don't know, like there's this story of Madhavi in Mahabharata where, you know, she was sold off in exchange for like 400 horses and stuff like that. If you look at those stories, then of course it starts to look like it's very biased and sexist. But again, there are some stories like, I mean, there's this one story of Andhak. In one of the versions, he's like the son of Shiva and Parvati, and he has like, you know, he cannot be killed by any man. I mean, it starts off at a very problematic. It's a very problematic premise that I can't be killed by a man, which means a woman can't really kill you. But in the end, he is killed by a woman, right? So it's there's a lot to take in from this story. So it has a lot of levels. So we can't really like term all of them under like one blanket, right?
Okay, that's interesting. I definitely I want to bring this point that I mean, terming, obviously throwing a blanket statement at the entire the idea of myths as sexist and or either like like completely equal is problematic itself, because myths are as diverse as our thoughts. That I definitely think it is. But I think I want to just bring a myth and like which kind of has both perspectives. And I think we were talking about the idea of looking at myths from our modern sensibilities. One of the stories is the story. I mean, I want to go away from the Indian myth itself, just looking at like a Greek myth, the story of Medusa. I think we've all heard of it. Like you see, basically Medusa is this woman. She's a gorgon or a monster with like snake hairs, and anyone who looks at her is turned into stone. The story of her goes in two folds. Now there are two backstories. One is the story that Medusa was supposed to be killed. Perseus was made told by Athena to go and kill her, and finally Athena gives her her own shield, and he uses his her own reflection to turn her into stone and cut her head and get it. So basically he's vanquished a monster. But then later on, this thing, Ovid, the author of this thing, many centuries later, has added a backstory. The backstory is Athena. Medusa was actually a beautiful priestess who was who used to worship Athena and all, and finally this kind of like got the attention of Poseidon, who's the god of sea. And Poseidon and Athena used to always have some sort of problem. Gods always had some sort of a territorial problem, especially given that Athena had won a space, and the space was called Athens. So finally he looks at this Medusa and he tries to like he makes advances on her, but she is very steadfast on the fact that she wants to just worship Athena. She has dedicated herself to be a vestigial virgin, which does not really bother Poseidon, and he ends up molesting and raping her in Athena's temple itself. Now Athena, there are two versions of this. Athena in one version gets so upset at of having her temple defiled that she actually punishes Medusa by having her hair turned into snake, her beauty taken off, and also the fact that the fact that someone could gaze upon her. So she's going to make sure that any man looks up, is going to turn into a stone, which is what makes her a monster. While there's also a version which tries to say that Athena did this as a way to protect her, her worshipper, so that no one can do what had to be done. Obviously, you can see where these two versions are coming from. The reason I just wanted to throw this mention is that both these versions are actually coming from ancient times. Obviously, the backstory comes a little later, maybe a few centuries down the thing. But by the time we have got it, we get a composite version. Most of the time, we've always heard of Medusa's story in this. The reason I wanted to mention this is on the topic we were talking about is that this depiction, the idea of showing the Medusa itself, how do you see it? Like now that you've heard these things, do you see that as I mean, did Medusa is the backstory something that is appealing? Because now if you look at it by one perspective, also the backstory comes a little later. So would you accept or reject that, or is this something that you believe that in terms of the myth itself, Medusa, this entire story is Medusa is a victim. In another story, okay, Medusa just was a part of a society which, something had to happen to her, and gods were she was just a pawn in the game. So anyone has any opinion about that?
Kanti.
Yeah.
Just you see, the narration again matters. Initially, Medusa was presented or portrayed as a, vampire sort of, or, witch, you can say it. But down the line, the backstory, as you mentioned in your discussion only, that she was a victim, not herself a witch. So again, it depends. Again, that is what we are saying for our side also of Indian myths. What we are projected or what we are portrayed might be they are different than what exactly where we are. And for this gender biased that we were discussing a lot, see, gender biased also, our fairer gender was much more in high repute and regarded, and was also given due respect as compared to present scenario, if you see that way. So coming back to your Medusa point, again it depends on narration. Again it depends on the portray, how you portray the picture. How you suppose you change the picture down the line. If you say Krishna was Lord Krishna was, or he was a demon, again portraying different, na? We do consider Karna as a different and Krishna as a different, and people do believe that Karna has a tough life than Krishna. But my point is, friend, I feel Krishna has tougher life than Karna. But again, different, how you portray the things. So in Medusa case also, any other myth, this is the picture, how you portray. And when you write a backstory, you always try to, see to it that you work out whether it's good, then you project a bad picture. If this picture is bad, then you try to project a good picture. That is it. This is my part.
No, that's interesting. I think the narration itself, changes the way a person is seeing it. Yeah. Sure. Any final thoughts on this thing about it before? So I have another question. This thing we can talk about. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I do. Again, like I think taking from what Mr. Manoj was saying, I think even I was thinking when we were talking about the whole idea of like how, how these myths are problematic in terms of if they're not, if they are following the patriarchal system of thought and all of that. But I do think like if you look at like, for example, the mime theory, the idea of the meme,
Memetic,
memes, yeah. Right? So memes, and I don't know much about it, but they basically propagate through people, right? They want to have a life, and they propagate through people who tell these, who share these memes. And I don't know why, but I feel there is a connection in terms of like, who are the storytellers who've been telling these myths again and again, and in their perspective, when their perspective changes, the story changes, and their perspective might reflect what that society was about at that point in their view. And so again, the story may remain the same, but the way the storyteller tells it may change. The way the viewer sees it at that point may change. I mean, I think the way, like, for example, if you take the Ramayana serial that used to come, like it was about like being extremely high, like, the morality is extremely important to the characters, and the way they showed it was like this proper household, with the proper duties. And it was very, like, I don't know, they didn't capture too much of that gray areas, right, in it, because that's the audience that they were talking to. And I think if somebody was to reinterpret it now, they might add a lot of things in it. And so that's where the storytellers come into play, where they can change, or they have the, they're able to sort of bring a certain light to the myth, and we're able to see it in a different way. And I think that if that affects the way, like, I think even with your Medusa example, I would say like the storyteller came back and gave you a backstory, and suddenly it's like, oh my God, like, oh my, there's another perspective now, and I didn't know about this, and now I think of Medusa as a good person. And so, I mean, that's what I mean, just a thought was coming to me when we were discussing this.
No, as a matter of fact, while Rohina was telling this, and Manoj also said, basically, lot comes from misinterpretation of meaning of mythology or myths. Instead of myth getting associated with the lie, actually it is what you have earlier also discussed, mythos, which is narration. And ultimately it comes down to narration, and the person who's narrated or written the story or told the story, how he tells. So he'll bring the perspective in this thing. And that's why mythology by themselves, if you go by the true meaning of it, I think it holds where it is.
Yeah, so just to add to that context, I think what we were, what was mentioned by my dad was the word myth comes from, the original etymological, the tracing is mythos, which just means narrative. So, I mean, obviously, like, given how it's gone through history, it's got its own recent association with falsity and all. But I mean, then again, that's the historical route it has taken. In the end, when we use the word myth in a contemporary language, we end up using it in both terms of misconception. We've also used, the term has its own association with certain type of stories. So I think that's where the problem comes in. And obviously, not everyone has that sort of an understanding or that sort of acceptance of the fact that way. It only gets even more complicated with our in Sanskrit, the word mithya comes in. Which is a completely different word, but then, sounding very similar. And given the fact that, given the ancientness of, Sanskrit, it's easier to believe that, that's where the word, mythology comes in, which is where I think we get such a diverse and such an ambiguous sort of a relationship with the word myth and all. So going to the next point, and I think the reason I bought the Medusa story, and at least the fascination, different opinions we have about the thing. I do like the fact that we all had a certain, association with how much narrative itself plays with the events of the story in framing our way of seeing it. The reason I brought that up with the story is because given that Medusa story is ancient, most of us, we've used this story has been used for argument of both sides. And that's actually, it's something that brings a very interesting thing. So I want to go to the next point. We spoke about the women, but now I want to talk about the other place where myths become a sort of do myths become problematic or don't they, is in the representation and treatment of different communities. What I mean by this is every story portrays a certain, certain culture, certain communities, and it also portrays another culture they are in coming in interaction with. Okay. If you look at any stories, I'll give, in Ramayana, the Vanar, this thing, whether it's the Rakshasa, in Norse mythology, there is the Asgardians fighting the, Jotuns, which is, Jotuns are like, these giants, which MCU has made them into giants, but they were just basically people who were not Asgardians. That's the thing. We have different things, even in Mahabharata, the different kingdoms, different, we have the tribals, so, a lot of the tribal and Adivasi communities also reflected and all. So the question that becomes is that are myths fair in their representation of different communities, or do these myths end up reducing them to certain stereotypes and all? Or at least by acknowledging them, they bring them into a conversation and then make them a part of a longer tradition. Yeah, so the floor is open if anyone has any opinion about this.
Again, I think it depends on the demographics, right? The version that you're reading and the way it's being interpreted, like the Nagas, for example, people from Nagaland, or Asuras who are from the southern part of India. Like, it's the way you interpret is going to kind of bring in like your problem, so to say, or like, the kind of version that you're reading is also going to like, kind of affect your point of view on the story.
That's true. Yeah. I also meant that, go ahead, the thing, Vasangi, I think you were saying something. Oh,
yeah.
Vasangi, you're on mute.
Sorry, Vasangi, were you saying something?
No. I just wanted to again add on to what Anuja said. Like, I'm sure we would have seen this maybe in many of these WhatsApp forwards and stuff. Like, there's this proverb that says, until the lion gets to tell his story, the historians will always glorify the hunter. So it is just one person's perspective. So there is, and again, like we've been discussing throughout, there is this entire thing of narration, because there's just one side to it that is coming to us. And the second thing is, I still think, we shouldn't give it that kind of, so much importance to judge and, say, is this right? Should I accept? Should I not accept? I don't think we have the right to it. It is just something that is there. But I feel like even though we consider ourselves more to be living in the modern times, I have a feeling that we are not so open to all the options that could have been there. So we have this need to typecast and put everything into boxes so that we can understand, but that's more our fault than theirs.
So I guess that's a very interesting point with the fact that we don't have the right to decide a particular myth. So the question that that comes out of that thing is, what would you think, that are myths inclusive? Are they inclusive of different multiple voices, or do they tend to dominate? Does most of the myths, especially the ones in mainstream, tend to be dominated by a certain voice or a certain community and all? What do you feel?
या सो अभी मैं एक एग्जांपल देता हूँ जैसे बहुत सारे आजकल सीरियल्स आ रहे हैं एक कुछ दोनों महाभारत पे होते हैं एक अर्जुन के पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू से एक कर्ण के पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू से सो जो कर्ण के पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू से उसमें उसको हीरो दिखाते हैं एंड जो अर्जुन के पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू से उसमें कर्ण को विलन दिखाते हैं सो ये हीरो विलन उसका जो गेम है वो चलता रहता है एंड जो उसमें रिप्रेजेंटेशन की आप बात कर रहे हो तो जो जिसको अगर हम विलन किसी को समझते हैं तो उसको हम हायर स्टेट में दिखाते हैं जैसे कर्ण को काफी लोग विलन समझते हैं एंड अगर हम अर्जुन के पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू से देखें तो उसको हायर स्टेट दिखाते हैं उसकी जो कम्युनिटी है उसको ज्यादा दिखाते हैं कि वो बहुत बड़े हैं ऊंचे कद के मतलब वो जो है राइट है अपनी जगह और जो ऑपोजिट वाले हैं ऑपोजिशन है वो गलत है सो इट डिपेंड्स ऑन द पर्सपेक्टिव एंड हाउ द नरेटर decide to show.
That's interesting. The fact that there is always someone's wrong and someone's right, that
someone
getting flipped and all. That's true.
Yeah, I must say that we should get away from this casteism that has taken a toll on the general category too much, and we should rise above this casteism and communities, that one community was shown more than that, and still we are suffering from all those issues. Still we are suffering from same issues that this caste, that caste, Dalit, Thakurs, it's too much. It's too much. I think the younger generation should, from all costs, they should rise above these petty groupism of various castes, communities, because it is taking a too much toll on the system. That's what I say. That's what I want to say, that probably that's why it is carrying on. Probably it was mentioned by the various authors or historians, and we are suffering from that. Still we are suffering from these ill effects or narrations, and that's what I want.
Side effects. No, I think that's an interesting point. If you, it can be said that something like the Mahabharata has a story of Karna, the whole idea of him being, Sutputra, or the son of a chariot, or Eklavya, is their entire storyline, whether Eklavya wasn't able to, get, Drona as his own, as his own teacher, or what Karna went through, as we mentioned, right? It can be said that those are a commentary on the fact that it's almost like the stories acknowledging the different struggles that different castes have. That's one way of saying that, right? It can also be said that given the fact that the stories have ultimately been more focused on a certain type of there may be the stories on the princess, the other stories are the other identities, the other the actual struggles that the person went through is just given in a very small tokenistic form. Though there are, that's where the conversation is, right? So I just wanted to get a feeler of what people feel about that. Is this myths do acknowledge it, and I think myths have always reflected the complexities, or myths have actually kind of erased and focused more on one, at least the ones you've been consuming and all.
If it's okay, I'd like to add something here.
Go ahead. Yeah.
So an example that comes to mind right now is in the Marvel universe. So if you look at the original comics, the Captain Marvel was a very like a very sort of consequential character. You know, like there was a lot to her. But I feel like a lot of the Marvel fans, after watching the movies, agree that she had that one movie, and after that, it looked like she was the one who was going to save the world, but she did barely anything in the end game. You know, she was barely there. And even the women from the Marvel universe, there was like, I remember there was this whole scene where it was just the women in a frame, and all the women superheroes were there. So that was like their moment. Like you said, a token mention was given to them, and that was it. Right. So I feel like the inherent writing of the Marvel comics in general probably wasn't as male centric, but that's how it became because they were pandering to the fans. So that's just sort of what they finally went with in the final cut of the movie. So again, it does come back to the narrative as well. But I also feel like we cannot at the end of the day deny that yes, it is about how you tell the story, but there are certain very glaring errors that we can see in a lot of myths that do lack that inclusivity, that do, like, you know, you can layer it however you want, but at the end of the day, the story does say that, you know, this person had this caste or this was done to them as a result of their skin color or whatever. Like that is something that we have to accept are a very inherent part of myths, no matter how the narrative is twisted. So
yeah, I think there's an interesting point of view you've brought where how it actually becomes a thing, and I think we do inherit some aspects of it. Anyone else has a point of view about that, whether how you feel about the representation of communities and all?
So I again have a feeling that, like, possibly just one community was, you have a certain set of people who are into poetry or documenting history. And so maybe, yes, many other communities were not given an option to, record their point of view or whatever they have gone through. It was not given as much importance as the main person or the, the important figure at that point of time. So, for example, we could focus on a king in that period of time, but then it would also be interesting to know what went on in the soldier's point of mind, as a bodyguard of the king, or someone who was just being sent to war. I mean, those kind of things, maybe they're just not recorded because they are not as important as the king of the land at that point of time. But that being said, I think now there are authors who are trying to, also kind of do a little bit more research on the side characters. I mean, you see books that are coming out from point of view of Duryodhana, or, of Ravana's son or Lakshmanan's wife and stuff like that. So I think maybe people are starting to search, but it's still not, I don't think it still trickles down to the common man perspective. But then I think it's I mean, I would always want to know what went on in Bharata's mind, or, I mean, Shatrughna's hardly there in the picture. We don't even know anything about Nakula and Sahadeva. I mean, everything is so focused on Bhima and Yudhishthira and, these kind of people. Like, what do the other wives of all these guys think, except Draupadi? I mean, what did Ulupi think, so these points of view are also not recorded, despite these people belonging to royalty or despite them being married into royalty. That has also not been documented. So there is a big gap in, what the other communities or other people have also gone through. But I just think it's just lack of documentation. It would have been definitely nice to have that also.
I think, yeah, like, I mean, the fact that many of these stories are coming from a certain mindset, many of them are male dominated, has definite, consequences on the way a person is depicted and all. But it's also interesting, as you mentioned, the fact that you and a lot of us are very interested in knowing what Shatrughna actually went through, means there is a demand for it, which means that there is a space for that stories to be written and to be created. And I think that the same thing is happening at a different community level. Like, certain stories are coming out from, the voices that weren't always there. Stories from Dalit community, stories from, certain different tribes and certain, even certain like, like certain people who weren't represented, whether it's LGBTQ. It's something that is now coming out. The question that becomes, which is always something that is there, is that do myths allow for that space to happen? Or when I say myths, I also mean people. Like, do we as people allow myths to be a space where contradictory stories can come in? Or is myths something that is getting into a very sacrilege territory where it's like, okay, it has to, because certain stories have dominated our times, and it automatically changes our perspective and all. And I mean, that's where the controversiality comes in, right? I mean, the myths have a lot of controversies and all. Speaking of which, I wanted to do one thing because about, controversial topics as we were doing. I'm going to be conducting a lot of topics, and I've been thinking about, many this thing for people who've been a part of my mathematical sessions. For those of you who haven't, feel free to go to my YouTube channel and see some of the older sessions. I take up stories from different places and all, but I'm going to be doing something different in the next, let's call it the next season of the things, where I'm trying to take up some more controversial topics. But before I do that, I also wanted to get people's opinion of how excited and all you are. So I'm just going to do a simple poll. This thing, I have a couple of polls, and I'll just do it as we are as we complete this conversation. So I'll just start the first poll, and I would want you guys to just give a voting of what you think. So I've just launched the poll. You guys must be getting it. I hope you're seeing the poll.
Yeah.
These topics also came because I was exploring areas which people, were they comfortable, were they or not comfortable and all. And I think I was very interested. So this is the first topic I could think of. To be really honest, the reason I also wanted to take up the poll is because I kind of got different answers from different people when I was talking to them physically. In fact, I got all 5 answers. So I thought I must open it up. Just wait 10 more seconds. And I hope everyone is, I think one person's left to vote. Okay. Okay, that's interesting. Great. So I'll stop the poll. And I'll. Do you guys want to see the results? Are you guys interested in seeing the results, or should I just
yeah.
So this is the the results I've got, which is really fascinating. So I guess I'll definitely cover this topic up at some point of time, maybe in the thing. I have a few topics already lined up. In fact, at the end, I'll mention the topic I'm going to do next. Just as an just for you guys, if you are interested in coming back. But this is the result, and I think it's interesting that I think people are interested in doing it. And for those of you who are not free, for the 2 people who are not free, you can definitely check out the the recording of it later. But thanks for that. And I just so just going from what Chaitanya and even Matangi, you guys pointed out a very interesting thing, and I wanted to just bring up the last question that I had regarding this topic. And I think Chaitanya, you put it really well, where there are these 2 different perspectives. So if the story is about Arjuna, the Karna is villain, and then the other way around. So it's almost like you can do 2 different perspectives, but then it's just a contradictory perspective. And Matangi, as you said, the narratives itself, I mean, how they are, I think sometimes the voices get lost out. So it's a matter of just changing the voice of the other people and all. But my question is regarding the treatment and the treatment of the stories itself. If you look at myths in general, they tend to be very, okay, let's go with the fact that they tend to be hero centric. There is a hero, many times male, obviously females also, but it's generally a story of a male or a hero or a protagonist, and how the society is waiting. There's a sort of a problem, which is maybe sort of a dharma sankat in in Sanatana Dharma stories, Puranic stories, where something is a problem and they're waiting for some divine intervention, an avatar of a god. In Greek stories, it becomes like a monster. So you have stories of Medusa having to be killed by Perseus, Chimera have to be killed by Bellerophon. And I mean, there are multiple stories, right? I'm pretty sure we all have at least, if not known the stories, we've heard of these stories, right? So this is a place where, like, you know, in most of the stories, the society is waiting for a savior. Society is waiting for something to happen. And this has been such an influential model, right? That we have that even in our superhero stories where the world needs to be saved by this one person. So my question is that model limiting, or is that model, because in doing so, there's also the fact that, you know, at the most, what you can subvert this trope is by, okay, if someone is not being represented, let's just flip it. And then you have situations like, okay, we'll make Karna the hero, but in that the Pandavas will become the villain. Or we'll have a Ravan story where we will talk about how Ram was actually wrong in doing something like that. Yeah. It's basically a subversion of the thing. Even when we look at female-centric stories, many times it becomes a sort of a, okay, now we're just going to talk about this point of view where everyone else is a side character. Is that model, the idea of having a person who has to save the society or the entire society, everyone else is a side character in that person's story, is that itself a limitation? Is that itself a problem in the storytelling itself? Because conversely, a question comes, and I'm going to use the example of Mahabharata itself. If you talk about Mahabharata, the story itself, you know, along with some of the other stories that I can think of, but I'm using Mahabharata because it's the most familiar with us. The story, if someone says, when does Mahabharata start? Tell me the one hero of Mahabharata, or tell me the one villain of this thing from the entire thing. It's going to be difficult because it's a story that goes across transgenerational. It spans over different things. People, if I ask you the one reason for the war, it's going to be difficult. There could be some primary reasons, which means that the story itself has sort of a mesh of characters, right? Allowing multiple entry points, multiple point of views and all. The question I want to put it is this treatment of a singular story, trying to bring out a singular story, trying to bring out a villain, is that itself a problem? Or is that is that something that, you know, we have to imbibe and we have to find a better way of just implementing the stories itself? Yeah.
I feel like that model is quite limiting and problematic. And again, I feel like we need to go back to what Mr. Kanti was mentioning about it being a narrative and a different time than ours. It's the same thing that I understand why one character is central, and, you know, it's about that big hero doing something, you know, going on a quest, and you know, like even Joseph Campbell's entire book that analyzes this talks about the exact same thing, where he says that the Greek tragedy, all of these things sort of ensure that people only want to see a hero sort of, you know, come of age and realize his responsibilities, and something big and happily ever after happens. But so that's why I see why these myths rose. But at the same time, I do believe it is quite limiting, because even though we say that, you know, Karna or Duryodhana or Draupadi can be the center of Mahabharata, we're doing it very consciously while saying they are not the center. That's why we're making them the center. You know, we know that they're the side character in the story. That's why we're making them it, which is exactly like I mentioned. That's what happened even with Captain Marvel. We said, release the movie on Women's Day. It's a women-centric hero. That's not what happens when you're talking about any male hero, which is, I think, also what Matangi was mentioning. And I really do agree with what you're saying, that sometimes it could just be stories about, you know, you're just the wife of somebody, and you're being you're doing a really good job at that, and you're living a happy life. So why can't we make the story about it? But I think the need for those sort of stories is more recent than we realize. If we cannot prescribe that to the older myths, because they were in a time where people demanded something epic to happen. That's why the whole term epic even rose. But this whole nihilistic outlook of, you know, just an everyday person doing their own thing, and it doesn't have to be a crazy story, sort of rose after the Second World War, where everything literally sort of was destroyed. People didn't know what a normal life was about. The exact same as the pandemic has made us sort of, where, you know, after that, the writing that came up was about, you know, a girl sitting and, painting her nails and thinking about what dress should she wear for a new party. You know, that sort of came up very recently. So it's a demand that is there today, but probably wasn't there when myths were written or propagated. So it is problematic, but I see why it happened.
That's thank you for that. That was interesting about how the narrative also has changed. It's an interesting perspective and a knowledge piece. Anyone else has a perspective whether these
I'd like to add, I kind of really like the examples that she used right now. It was very nice to see that flow of how actually things change. But again, like coming back to your question, I would say that from a storyteller's point of view, I think it is easier for him to kind of spin the story when he keeps one point as constant. And what is that one point which is constant? The one that catches your attention. So if you had too many floating characters, it would be tough for him to tell the story. It would be tough for the listener to comprehend the story. And I think that's just partly human. I mean, even after we, let's say, wind up this session, there would be certain things that stay in our mind just because that appeal to us, or we got that point or something of that sort. We might not remember all the members and all the things that they said or all that they were doing side by side. From a point of view, from just a third person point of view, maybe later on I would like to know, okay, what did this person do when I was saying this, or what did that person think when I was making this point. But when I'm just thinking back, then I would just remember few episodes or few events, and that's what I would possibly weave into my story. So I think that's from a storyteller point of view, that's possibly one reason why it is hero centric, and then there is a problem and there is an antagonist, and it is just easier to convey the story. So possibly that.
That's interesting. Yeah. Anaga, I saw that comment that you've written. To be really honest, I think even in my own life, sometimes I don't feel like a main character. I feel like a extra in a deleted scene. So, it comes and goes. So, yeah. But thanks, I would love to happen that. Matangi, that's very interesting. I think you're right because, I think Anaga mentioned the fact about hero's journey, which is what Joseph Campbell said. And I think we're following that from myths. The other model that I was suggesting, a term that has been, encompassed to talk about that is called the collective journey, which is actually a recent term. I'll just give you an example in the modern things, because Mahabharata, while it's a good example of a collective journey, unfortunately or fortunately, the way the stories are portrayed, ultimately when it comes, they kind of try to singularize it. It becomes a very centric thing. The stories become very centric to just the Pandava, sort of a clan and all, and everyone feels like a peripheral, like as side characters and support systems and all. Automatically, you don't see them. A very good example is Game of Thrones, right? Game of Thrones was a thing that kind of changed the perspective, where suddenly good characters and bad characters were in a morally gray zone. Everyone was expendable because, let's face it, in stories which are hero's journey, you tend to know that the character is going to survive, but suddenly that was taken off. I would even argue something like MCU and all, if you just take it away from just the main the main movies like Avengers sort of a thing, if you see it from the entirety of movies, TV shows and all, is a collective journey. The idea of a collective journey means you can enter from anywhere. You can have an entire story that is not related to the main story, but still be a part of the system and all. So the reason I was mentioning this is that, the rules itself change altogether. The rules of the storytelling itself change, right? And I mean, when the rules change, you can also bring up new aspects and all sort of a thing. Generally, we look at ancient myths, and there are some very weird rules, underlying rules and all sort of a thing. Many things in societies also. And that's the reason I was mentioning it. That also reminds me, a time for a second poll, which is another question that's going to come, talking about how myths have dealt with some of these aspects of relationships and how a thing has come. I'm just going to release the next thing. Yeah, so those. In a very interesting way, just to tell you a story about this, where so generally whenever I I have a new new session happening, I send it to friends and I put it on different places and all. Someone actually asked me specifically that what about this thing, can you tell me what happened in mythology? And I was like, that's very specific, and it was a friend of mine. So almost asked her, like, are you considering it? Is that why you want the legitimacy in mythology? I didn't get an answer, but they're like, just let me know whenever you do the session. So, oh, great! I see everyone has done it. Interesting. I think this one, also seems to be, in the 2 zone. So definitely, I'll be doing this session also. And there are some very fascinating stories. I mean, obviously, you can know the most common one is the Draupadi one, but there are some other stories also that do take place out of a time. Great. So yeah, I think I was just, I was mentioning this about these 2 different story types and all. The question, what I was asking is, do hero's journey, does the hero's journey, the way of looking at it, do justice to the new retellings, or does it limit us right now? And that's the question I was putting forth and all. Anaga, I think you gave a very interesting aspect of what is the problem. Anyone else has any perspective on that?
So I would say,
yeah.
Go ahead.
No, please. Please.
Okay. The point I was just trying to make was that Mahabharat, while we many of us consider it as a hero's journey, but it is more because we only know one aspect of Mahabharat, which is the central theme. If you see Mahabharat in its entirety, it's a collective journey. And obviously, while Shri Krishna and Arjun and Pandav may remain as a central theme in that, but the story and stories around various characters are there and in depth, many of those. And one needs to, it's more because of our lack of going through the entire Mahabharat. We think that it is this thing, but personally, I think it's a collective journey kind of thing.
No, I think that's true. That by itself, the framework of the story does give a, sort of a collective journey perspective. It would be very interesting to see a collective journey of Ramayana. I mean, that it also means that, you need to change the name, because the name itself means journey of Ram. But definitely, that's an interesting. Chaitanya, you were about to say something.
Yeah, so I was saying that कि ये जो टर्म है कि हाँ हीरो सेंट्रिक होता है, सो मुझे लगता है कि हर करेक्टर अपने जो स्टोरी है उसमें हीरो है. So like if you talk about, I mean, if there is a book which is centered on Shakuni, let's say, so मतलब Shakuni उसका हीरो बन जाएगा. So you can't say कि वो हीरो नहीं है, वो विलन है and this and that. So हर कैरेक्टर अपनी स्टोरी में हीरो होता ही होता है. So you can't deny it.
You can't go away from the hero.
No, absolutely right. Chaitanya is absolutely right. If you go by the story of Shakuni and how it has happened and how this thing, and that was his revenge which he was taking because of the mistreatment which was done to him or to his family. So if you just take that, he is the hero in that, and he was successful in what he was trying to achieve. Similarly, in Mahabharata, you take Shikhandi's story by itself. So that's a story by itself, incomplete, where Shikhandi has a purpose or a motive, and there is a backstory why it happened and how she tried to achieve it, or he tried to achieve it, however you want to put it, as in that case.
That's true.
So चाहे हमें लगे कि हाँ हमारे प्रोस्पेक्टिव से वो गलत, शकुनी ने गलत किया, लेकिन उसके प्रोस्पेक्टिव से उसने बिल्कुल सही किया. So yeah, so we can say that.
So I think in some ways giving a backstory to a character, like, legitimizes their protagonist, makes them a protagonist. And I think that's a very, very interesting point to definitely consider. Because, if you look at many stories, a backstory is a very smart way of, like, giving, making a hero and, justifying certain actions a person has taken. If you look at even Draupadi, the backstory goes that she was actually born, or she came to existence to Drupad because she was meant to destroy the thing. So what I find very interesting with that aspect is that, as Dad mentioned, and I think Chaitanya, you mentioned about heroes thing, is that if you look at that way, while it legitimizes and even humanizes people, they, if you look at Draupadi, or even it's look at Sita, where in a previous Punna Janam, she was supposed to be someone else who decided, I'll come back and I will be the reason where Ravan will die, sort of a thing. I find it very interesting because in a way, a woman character or a certain character is becoming and certain assault or certain thing done to the person is becoming a sort of a plot point or a reason for the stories to go forward and all. And I think that's the reason I mentioned this is because that's where I think the hero's journey or even collective journeys, they tend to differ, where you can tend to change the structure altogether. Just having a backstory does not make it something. Even the idea of a hero and a villain also, should there be a sort of a thing, is it not possible to have two characters and and have two contradictory opinions in the same stories itself, and that becomes a question. But yeah, I think as you pointed out, it somewhere down the line, we as humans, we tend to remember a hero and all. And I think that just brings me to the last poll. I hope you. I don't want to make a sort of a I hope it's not annoying, but it really helps me because I think we are topical about that.
In any case, with Bihar elections, it's a polling season.
Guys, good practice, guys. So yeah. So the reason I mentioned this thing, and the reason that came in my mind when you mentioned about the the Shakuni and sort of a thing, is that there are many stories where women, or there have been stories where women have had some sort of an atrocities done to them, not just by a bad person and all, but as a sort of a tactic or as a sort of a reason to for a certain war and all. And very surprisingly, there are stories in our own mythology where seemingly good guys or people who are not associated with the evil side or the bad side have done this, where women have become a sort of a plot point, so I found this very interesting. To be really honest, this is the one I was most worried about, because as you can see, the title itself has a thing, and trust me, the stories are even more controversial, but will definitely be exciting to see the thing. Great. I think we've got a perspective, and yeah, it wins too. I mean, 50%, that's a good audience for me to do it. So in some ways, I think I can cover these stories in some point of time. But for me, it's definitely interesting to know that people are interested to know it. And by the way, all these stories or all these things, I'm not I'm not making it up right now, though I don't see a harm in that. There are stories in mythologies that are there, so I'll definitely bring that up. But overall, yeah, guys, I think we're coming to the conclusion of it. We have like a 5 minutes and all. I want to know if you guys have any concluding thoughts or anything about. So we covered 3 things, right? We covered about women, the treatment of, we covered about myths itself. We covered about treatment of women, communities, and the stories itself. So are myths problematic? If I have to just put it in like, yes, no, maybe, or depends, what do you guys want to say?
That should be the last poll.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the storytelling is so much more of consequence than the story itself, right? So it will always depend on who's telling the story and where they are coming from. So like these stories have such a seismic impact on us, right? Like when the Ramayana had first been screened on the Doordarshan television, Doordarshan, right? So it had like the entire cabinets would fail to show up because the finale was happening. Like Ram was about to fight that day for the Ravana. So we had like all the meetings were delayed. And even if like today, if you visit like some of the houses in North India, the rural parts, right? So they have like this small temple wherein they actually have a picture of Arun Goel for Ram, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, it's kick-ass. I mean, if you look at it, that show had like really changed our perspective. So you can see like how it had impacted so many lives, and also like because now they have screened it again, and it didn't really have the same impact, right? Because we have like moved so far ahead in terms of storytelling and how we have evolved. So it'll always depend on who's telling the story.
So it depends. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyone with a differing opinion, like myths are problematic or myths are not problematic?
Kanti, to put on a word, I would like to echo the views of Anuja. Actually, I wanted to mention it earlier also. see what my great grandpa liked in myth or agreed to mythology was less or more as compared to my grandpa. See, then my pa was there. He was less convinced to all myths. Me, as Anuja mentioned, that there was a rescreening of the Ramayana. My child and friends were not interested. They're all teenies to even sit. When I asked them, please do come and have a look. This is one of the best serial of 90s, and we have leave it here. What the hell you are talking about? We don't want to. So that's why I say when you either use a word with myth, a different word, a sort of other word with myth, then down the line, scientific studies, or if not scientific studies, we may change the concept of upcoming generation. See, I have measured 5 generations: my great grandpa, my pa, me, and my son. So you can see the difference. What they realize, it is diminishing day by day. So what Anuja has put, it's really totally applicable. That it's fact.
No, I think that's true. I think
something good to these words, like jugglery of words. You can say nothing else. My part. Thank you.
No, and I think you've articulated both of you have articulated really well about how much myths mean to us. I mean, especially I think for me, many times, especially when I'm researching for a myth, and my family can vouch for that. Like for me, it becomes like oh my God, how could this person say this? And I'm like acting as if this person just said it in this moment, even though the story has been written many generations or many years sort of a thing ago. And I sometimes start like having a problem, like okay, how could they do this? And like I'm like literally having a conversation. I tend to talk a lot to myself, so that also has its own consequences. But yeah, I think that's where I mean, like what's interesting is that despite the different opinions we've had about myths, and I think we've brought some very interesting point of view. The importance and the relevance of myths is something that I think we've all resonated with, and that's very interesting. So yeah, I think we to be honest, I think that these are the questions I had, and we are actually right on time of finishing the session. I just want to know, I hope you guys enjoyed this session. This was supposed to be an open session, so I left it open and all. Let me know if there are better ways to improve it. I mean, Mathematical Meetup is something I'll try to have it every month. Invite your friends, and if there's something we can do more, you want more storytelling, more discussions, do let me know. So we'll connect again. And by the way, guys, just to tell you, I'm going to be doing a session on 31st, which is Halloween, and the topic is going to be on trickster, tricked, and treated. Stories about trickster gods and all who get a taste of their own medicine. And that's going to be it's going to be stories from Indian mythology, African mythology, and a couple of other things. I'm still finalizing on the actual stories, but there is a very interesting stories and all. And we know that trickster gods are obviously been there in multiple things, so it'll be fun to see what they got and all. I hope you get excited. I'll definitely put up the the event and all, and send you mails. So if you guys are interested, we can have it up. And thank you guys for joining in. It was a fascinating session for me. I love whenever we talk about myths.
Same here.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you everyone. Okay.
Thanks a lot.
Have a good weekend, everyone.
Great session. Thanks, guys.
Thanks for this lovely session. Bye.